Mr. Whitestone, we're letting you go. Effective immediately. The words came from across a mahogany desk, so polished I could see my own reflection staring back at me, confused. The man delivering my execution wore a suit that cost more than my first car, cufflinks that probably had their own insurance policy, and an expression that suggested he'd rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. 3 times. Maybe 4. His name was Vincent Cross, the newly appointed Chief Operating Officer. 28 years old, MBA from somewhere expensive, and exactly 9 hours into his first day at Crestmark Dynamics. He had gelled hair, a Rolex that caught the afternoon light like a disco ball, and the kind of confidence you only get from never being told no by anyone who mattered. I didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there in the leather chair I'd picked out 7 years ago when we were furnishing this office with second-hand furniture and prayers. "I'm sorry, what?" I finally said, keeping my voice level. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. Termination notice. My name printed in Arial, size 12. Professional, sterile, wrong. "It's nothing personal," he continued, fingers drumming against his knee like he was anxious to get to lunch. "The company is restructuring. New leadership means new direction. Your position has been deemed redundant." Redundant. That word hung in the air like smoke. Behind him stood Rachel from HR, clutching a tablet to her chest like a shield. She wouldn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on a spot somewhere above my left shoulder, and I could see her jaw working like she was chewing glass. "Who authorized this?" I asked. Vincent smiled. The kind of smile you give a child who asked why the sky is blue. "I did. As COO, personnel decisions fall under my purview. It's in my contract." His contract. The one I hadn't seen, the one the board apparently signed off on while I was in Singapore closing a deal that would net us $42 million in revenue over the next 3 years. I'd been gone for 8 days. Came back to find my access card deactivated and a meeting request that turned out to be my own funeral. "I'll need your badge, laptop, and any company materials," Vincent said, extending his hand like we were completing a transaction. "Security will escort you out." I stood up slowly, adjusted my tie, and reached into my jacket pocket. Not for my badge, for my phone. I pulled it out, unlocked it with my thumbprint, and opened my email. "Before I go," I said calmly, "I want to make sure we're doing this correctly. You're terminating me without cause, without board approval, and without severance discussion?" Vincent's smile twitched. "Just barely." "That's correct." "And you're doing this under your authority as COO?" "Yes." He was getting impatient now. "Mr. Whitestone, this doesn't need to be difficult." I nodded, tapped my phone screen 3 times, and hit send. "You're right," I said. "It doesn't." Then I placed my badge on his desk, turned, and walked out. Rachel followed me with her eyes, still silent. The security guard stationed outside looked more confused than concerned, like he'd been told to expect a scene and got a handshake instead. I didn't give him one. I walked past the bullpen where junior analysts pretended not to notice, past the break room where someone had just started a fresh pot of coffee I'd never drink, past the conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown, where I'd spent countless nights building financial models and pitch decks that turned this company from a startup dream into a $68 million operation. As I reached the elevator, I checked my phone. 3 confirmations already. The email had gone through. Subject line, Emergency Invocation, Clause 11D, Shareholder Protection Protocol. The elevator doors closed, and I allowed myself the smallest smile. Vincent Cross had no idea what he'd just activated. Let me tell you, something about power that business school doesn't teach you. It's not about the title on your door, or the size of your office, or how many people report to you on an org chart. Power is about ownership, equity, the percentage of the company that sits next to your name in the Delaware Corporate Registry. And I owned 75% of Crestmark Dynamics, not 75% of some subsidiary, not 75% of preferred shares with no voting rights, 75% of the entire company, common stock, full voting control, ironclad, notarized, and filed with the Secretary of State, How did I get there? Simple. I never wanted the spotlight. When Lawrence Garrett founded Crestmark Dynamics 9 years ago, he was a genius with numbers and absolutely terrible with people. Brilliant financial engineer, couldn't manage a lemonade stand without 3 lawsuits and a health code violation. He had the vision. I had the execution. I came in as employee number 3. No. Fancy title. Just senior advisor. My job was to make sure his ideas didn't bankrupt us before we hit year 2. I streamlined operations, built relationships with investors, handled compliance, negotiated contracts, and kept the SEC from knocking down our door when Lawrence decided accounting rules were suggestions. For that, Lawrence offered me a vice president title and a salary bump. I asked for equity instead. "You'd rather own a piece of nothing than get paid?" He laughed. "I'd rather own a piece of something than work for it," I replied. He shrugged and gave me 4%. By year 2, I was at 11%. Lawrence's co-founder quit in a screaming match over creative differences, which is code for he embezzled $70,000 and got caught. I bought his shares at a discount. He needed cash fast. Divorce lawyers aren't cheap. By year 4, I was at 19%. An early investor wanted out to fund his next venture. I took his position. By year 6, I was at 38%. Lawrence's brother tried to stage a hostile takeover, failed spectacularly, and settled out of court. Part of that settlement? His shares. All of them. And by year 8, when Lawrence decided he wanted to retire early and move to Costa Rica to find himself, I bought him out completely. 37% in one transaction. He wanted liquidity. I wanted control. That put me at 75%. The remaining 25% was split between small investors, a venture fund that barely paid attention, and the board members who treated their shares like lottery tickets they forgot they bought. Nobody cared. Nobody paid attention because I didn't flaunt it. I didn't put my name on the website, didn't do interviews, didn't post LinkedIn think pieces about leadership. I just worked, quietly, efficiently. And while everyone else was focused on titles and press releases, I was accumulating power in the only place it actually mattered, the paperwork. And buried deep in that paperwork, in the shareholder agreement that every board member signed but none of them read, was Clause 11D. It was added during our Series A funding round. An investor from Boston, paranoid about founder risk, wanted assurance that if someone unqualified ever took control and started making reckless decisions, there was a kill switch, a way to stop the bleeding before it became a hemorrhage. I wrote it, legal approved it, everyone signed it. Clause 11D stated in very clear language that if any executive without equity terminated a shareholder employee without board approval, all executive authority would be immediately suspended. The shareholder could trigger an emergency vote, and if that shareholder held majority control, they could override any appointment made in the previous 30 days. It had never been used until today. Because Vincent Cross, in his infinite wisdom and designer suit, had just terminated a shareholder employee, me, without board approval, without cause, and without realizing he'd just pulled the pin on a grenade he didn't know he was holding. The email I sent was addressed to every board member, every investor, and our general counsel. It included a formal invocation of Clause 11D, a complete equity breakdown showing my 75% stake, and a request for an emergency board meeting within 4 hours. The clock was already ticking. I sat in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the office, ordered an espresso, and waited. My phone buzzed first at 2:47 p.m. Our general counsel, Albert Crane, 3 words. "Call me immediately." I didn't. Second buzz at 2:51 p.m. Board chair, Diane Mercer. "Alan, we need to talk. This is urgent." I sipped my espresso. Third buzz at 2:55 p.m. Vincent Cross. No message, just 3 missed calls in a row. I watched the notifications pile up like snow. Emails, texts, voicemails. A few from investors I hadn't heard from in 2 years, suddenly very interested in corporate governance. At 3:03 p.m., my phone rang again. This time I answered. "Alan," it was Diane. She sounded like she'd just run a marathon through a panic attack. "Where are you?" "Getting coffee," I said. "Good coffee. There's a place on 4th that does a pour-over that'll change your life." This isn't funny. I'm not laughing. There was a pause. I could hear papers shuffling in the background, voices. Someone was yelling, but the words were muffled. "Did you really invoke Clause 11D?" she asked. "I did." "Alan, do you understand what that means?" "Better than anyone." Another pause. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost resigned. "The meeting's at 4, conference room B. You should be there." "I'll consider it," I said, and hung up. I finished my espresso, left a generous tip, and walked back to the office at exactly 3:47 p.m. The building felt different when I walked back in. The security guard who'd escorted me out 3 hours earlier just nodded and stepped aside, didn't ask for my badge, didn't call anyone, just let me through like I'd never left. The elevator ride up was silent except for the mechanical hum and the quiet breathing of an intern who looked at me like I was a ghost. When the doors opened on the executive floor, I could hear it immediately. Raised voices, not quite shouting, but close, coming from conference room B. I walked slowly, deliberately, past my old office. The door was open. Vincent's jacket was draped over the chair. His laptop bag sat on the floor, expensive leather monogrammed with his initials. There was a bottle of champagne on the desk, unopened. He'd been celebrating. I kept walking. The conference room door was closed, but I could see through the glass. 12 people, the full board. Vincent sat near the head of the table, face red, gesturing emphatically. Diane sat at the head, hands folded, staring at a stack of papers in front of her like they were a terminal diagnosis. Albert Crane, our general, counsel, stood near the corner, reading from a tablet. His expression was the legal equivalent of, "I told you so." I opened the door. Everyone stopped talking. Vincent's head snapped toward me, eyes wide. "You can't be here. You were terminated." I walked to the empty seat directly across from him and sat down. "Actually," I said, placing my phone on the table. "I can." Albert cleared his throat. "Per Clause 11D of the shareholder agreement, Mr. Whitestone has the right to attend this meeting. In fact, his presence is required." Vincent looked at Diane. "What is he talking about?" Diane didn't answer. She just slid a document across the table toward him. "Read it," she said quietly. Vincent grabbed the paper, scanned it, and I watched his face go through 5 stages of corporate grief in under 30 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, panic, anger, and finally a sickly kind of pale realization. "This is insane," he muttered. "This clause can't be enforceable." "It is," Albert said. "Reviewed by 3 law firms, signed by every voting member, filed with the state. It's as enforceable as gravity." Vincent looked around the table for support. Nobody met his eyes. "Let me summarize," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You terminated me this afternoon without board approval. I am a shareholder employee. Under Clause 11D, that action triggers an automatic suspension of your executive authority. The board is required to convene within 4 hours. And because I hold 75% of voting shares, I can call for an immediate vote to rescind any executive appointment made in the last 30 days. I paused, let that sink in. "You were appointed 27 days ago." The room was so quiet, I could hear the ventilation system. Vincent's jaw tightened. "This is a coup." "No," I said calmly. "This is corporate governance. You overstepped. The system corrected itself." He stood up, nearly knocking his chair over. "I was brought in to fix this company, to bring in new leadership, to make tough decisions." "And who brought you in?" I asked. He hesitated. "The board," he said finally. "Did the board know I owned 75% of the company?" Another hesitation. Longer this time. Diane answered for him. "No, we didn't." I looked at her. "How is that possible?" She shifted in her seat, uncomfortable. "Your equity was listed in the registry, but it wasn't disclosed during the hiring process. Vincent was recommended by an executive recruiting firm. We voted on his appointment based on his credentials. Did anyone review the shareholder agreement before giving him termination authority?" Silence. I nodded slowly. "So you handed executive power to someone who had no idea how this company actually worked. And when he made a reckless decision, the safeguards I put in place years ago activated exactly as designed." Vincent slammed his hand on the table. I'm trying to build something here. You're trying to dismantle something you don't understand, I shot back. This company survived 9 years of chaos, bad decisions, and near bankruptcy because I built systems, protections, clauses like 11D that prevent exactly this kind of impulsive nonsense. He glared at me. You're threatened by new leadership. I'm not threatened by competence, I said. I'm allergic to arrogance. Albert stepped forward. Gentlemen, we're here to vote. Mr. Whitestone has invoked his right to call for a rescission of Mr. Cross's appointment. Per the shareholder agreement, this vote requires a simple majority of voting shares. He looked at me. You hold 75%. The outcome is clear. Vincent looked around the table one more time, searching for an ally, a lifeline, anything. He found nothing. This is insane, he repeated, but his voice had lost its edge. He sounded like someone who just realized he'd walked into the wrong building and couldn't find the exit. Diane cleared her throat. All in favor of rescinding Vincent Cross's appointment as Chief Operating Officer? I raised my hand. Nobody else moved. Not because they disagreed, because they knew it didn't matter. My 75% was the only vote that counted. Motion carries, Diane said quietly. Vincent stared at her, then at me, then back at her. That's it? He asked. I'm just done? Yes, I said. You're done. He grabbed his jacket, his tablet, his dignity, and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft click. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Diane looked at me, exhausted. What now, Alan? I stood up, straightened my tie, and looked around the table at the people who'd forgotten I existed. Now, I said, we run the company properly. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 7 a.m. No announcement, no grand entrance. I just walked in, took the elevator to the executive floor, and went to my office. The one Vincent had occupied for exactly 9 hours. Someone had already removed his things. The champagne bottle was gone. So was his laptop bag. The desk was clean, the chair pushed in, like he'd never been there at all. I sat down, opened my laptop, and started working. At 8:15 a.m., Rachel from HR knocked on my door. Mr. Whitestone, I looked up. Yes? She stood in the doorway, still clutching her tablet, but her expression was different now, less guarded, more cautious. I wanted to apologize, she said quietly. For yesterday, I should have questioned the termination. I should have checked the shareholder agreement. I leaned back in my chair. You were doing your job, Rachel. Vincent gave you an order. You followed protocol. But I knew something was wrong, she insisted, and I didn't speak up. I nodded. Next time, speak up. She exhaled, relieved. Thank you. Is there anything else? She hesitated, then asked, what should I tell people about what happened? I thought about it for a moment. Tell them the truth, I said. An executive made a bad decision. The company's safeguards worked, and we're moving forward. She nodded and left. By 9 a.m., the entire office knew. Not because I sent an email or held a meeting, because word travels fast in a building where everyone's on Slack and nobody can resist gossip. By 10 a.m., I had 3 calls from investors asking what happened. I told them the same thing I told Rachel. Bad decision. Safeguards worked. Moving forward. By 11 a.m., Diane called me directly. Alan, we need to discuss next steps. The board wants to know who's running operations now that Vincent is gone. I am, I said simply. You're taking the COO position? No, I'm taking the CEO position. There was a long pause. Alan, you've never wanted that title. I've never needed it, I corrected. But after yesterday, it's clear this company needs structure, leadership, someone who actually understands how it works. The board will need to vote on that. The board will vote however I tell them to, I said, not as a threat, just as fact. I own 75%, Diane. If I want to be CEO, I'm CEO. The vote is a formality. Another pause. You're right, she admitted. I'll schedule a meeting for tomorrow. Make it today, I said. 3 p.m., same room. She agreed and hung up. The board meeting at 3 p.m. was shorter than the one the day before. I walked in, sat at the head of the table, and didn't wait for pleasantries. I'm proposing a restructuring, I said. Effective immediately, I'm assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer. Albert will remain as General Counsel. Diane will continue as Board Chair. We'll hire a CFO with actual finance experience, not an MBA who learned accounting from YouTube videos. And we'll implement quarterly audits to ensure nothing like yesterday ever happens again. I slid a folder across the table. Details are in here. Questions? Nobody spoke. Good, I said. All in favor? Every hand went up, not because they agreed, because they had no choice. Motion carries, Diane said, and for the first time in 2 days, she almost smiled. 3 weeks later, Crestmark Dynamics was running smoother than it had in years. I hired a CFO named Elliot Brennan, a former auditor with a reputation for finding fraud before it became headlines. He cleaned up our books in 72 hours and identified 3 expense accounts that had been quietly funneling money into personal ventures. We shut them down. Nobody was arrested, but 2 executives quietly resigned. I brought in a new head of operations, a woman named Claire Donovan, who'd spent a decade at a logistics firm and knew how to scale processes without breaking them. Within a week, she'd optimized our workflow and reduced overhead by 14%. And I implemented a new policy. No executive hires without shareholder disclosure. If you're bringing someone into a leadership role, the majority shareholder gets notified. No exceptions. The board didn't argue. As for Vincent Cross, I heard through the grapevine that he landed at a startup in Austin. Lasted 3 months before they let him go. Apparently, he tried to fire the CTO on his second day and learned the hard way that the CTO owned 40% of the company. Some people never learn. 6 months after the firing that wasn't, I was sitting in my office when Rachel knocked again. Mr. Whitestone, there's someone here to see you. I looked up. Who? Lawrence Garrett. I blinked. Lawrence, the founder, the man who'd sold me his shares and disappeared to Costa Rica. Send him in. A moment later, Lawrence walked through the door, tanned, barefoot, wearing a linen shirt that looked like it cost $8 at a beach market. He looked healthier than I'd ever seen him. Alan, he said, grinning, you look stressed. I'm running a company, I replied. Stress comes with the territory. He sat down uninvited. I heard what happened. Vincent Cross, the whole Clause 11D thing. That was brilliant. That was necessary. Same thing. He leaned, back looking around the office. This place looks different, more serious. It's profitable, I said. We hit $23 million in revenue last quarter, up 38% from last year. He whistled. Damn, I sold at the right time. You sold because you wanted out, and you bought because you wanted in. He smiled. I always knew you'd end up running this place, Alan. You were better at it than I ever was. Heh, I didn't argue. So why are you here, Lawrence? He shrugged. Curiosity, mostly. Wanted to see if you actually kept it alive. Glad you did. Anything else? He stood, stretched, and headed for the door. Then he stopped and turned back. One thing, he said. That clause you wrote, 11D. Did you always know you'd need it? I thought about that. No, I admitted, but I knew someone would. He laughed. That's the difference between us, Alan. I built things hoping they'd work. You built things assuming they'd break, and that's why I'm still here. He nodded, gave me a lazy salute, and walked out. I never saw him again. A year later, Crestmark Dynamics crossed $100 million in revenue. We expanded into 3 new markets, hired 82 new employees, and landed a partnership with a Fortune 500 company that would have seemed impossible back when we were running on fumes and hope. I still didn't put my name on the website, still didn't do interviews, still didn't post on LinkedIn about leadership or resilience or whatever buzzword was trending that week. I just worked. But every now and then, when I walked through the office and saw people actually building something sustainable, something real, I'd think back to that day. The day Vincent Cross fired me. The day he learned that titles don't mean anything if you don't own the room. And the day I reminded everyone that power isn't given, it's built, one clause at a time. If this story reminded you why paperwork matters more than ego, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Not because I need the validation. I own 75% of this channel too, but because stories like this don't tell themselves. And you'd be surprised how many people are walking around thinking they run the place when they're really just renting the furniture. Thanks for watching. And remember, always read the shareholder agreement, always.